Yugioh GX is the second generation of Yu-Gi-Oh! That brought new cards, new story, and new characters. For many, this was a jumping off point for the series. The massive tonal shift from the end of Duel Monsters to the beginning of GX was quite jarring, not to mention the extremely poor localization it had in the West. Despite those facts, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is secretly incredible, and I don't think anybody knows it. So, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always been a show that was centered around marketing a card game. That would lead most people to believe that it's mostly advertisement with little to no real worthwhile content. And to be honest, that can ring pretty true for certain parts of the series. But today, I want to take some time to talk to you about why Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is unironically one of my favorite anime series out there. I feel like at this point, I should put an obligatory disclaimer that this show is aimed at children to promote a card game, so not every single episode is going to be a banger. However, the overarching story and the character arcs of the main cast are absolutely phenomenal. There are quite a few interesting subjects in GX, which range from plot points to character arcs, and what I really want to look at here is Judai's development from the beginning of the show to the end. For the purpose of this analysis, I'm going to be using materials from the subbed iteration of the show, as the localization never finished the main plot, and changed the best parts about the show to fit with a younger Western audience. Those parts mainly being character development for Judai and others in the cast. Starting at the beginning, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX seems to be a very carefree, inconsequential anime that doesn't have a whole lot to say about its world, narrative, or characters. For Western audiences, this left many people to drop the show due to a lack of substance, and for the first 2 seasons, that's certainly a valid point. Although I would propose that the slice-of-life-esque storytelling is purposefully lighthearted as a means to set up the characters' personalities so that they can be examined under hardship later on, but I digress. Throughout seasons 1 and 2, not much really happens other than some dueling and some light comedy. During this time, the viewer gets to know Judai as an almost infallible person that just doesn't lose. Over the course of seasons 1 and 2, I believe Judai loses only a total of 3 times, once to Ryo, once to Kaibaman, and once to Edo. Due to his damn near perfect reputation, Judai becomes the designated problem solver for those around him. Whenever anything goes wrong at Duel Academy, it falls squarely on Judai's shoulders to fix it. This kind of pressure is immense for a kid who's only 15 at the start of the show, and it sets up an important dynamic between him and his friends. So while the first bit may seem boring on the surface, if you look a bit deeper, you can see that it's actually setting up for a massive collapse that will fundamentally change the dynamics of the show and its characters. The collapse that seasons 1 and 2 were building towards finally happens in season 3, when Johan, who came to be Judai's closest friend, is torn away from him and presumed to be dead. This sends Judai into a massive depressive spiral where he becomes unrecognizable as the Judai from seasons 1 and 2. During this hardship, Judai is convinced that he can save Johan, and he goes to any and every lengths available to do so. This dark path leads him so far that he sacrifices his closest friends and awakens the Supreme King inside of him. Side note, the Supreme King is a really weird concept that requires a lot of explaining and backstory, but that's not really the purpose of this video, so suffice it to say that the Supreme King is Judai's alter ego that holds extreme power when it comes to dueling. As the Supreme King, Judai supposedly kills 2 of his friends, and when he eventually comes to, he's wrought with grief over the friends that he's lost on his journey towards Johan, who, of course, may or may not even be alive. At this point in the show, Judai is absolutely destroyed emotionally. Gone is the fun-loving duel champion from seasons 1 and 2, only to be replaced by a boy who is so traumatized, he struggles to use his own cards, even when faced with a life-or-death decision. From this point, Judai begins the arduous process of gathering up the shattered remains of his life and reconstructing himself into the person he becomes at the end of season 4. Judai always felt a certain responsibility for not just his friends, but all of Duel Academy, and for anyone around him. This is of course a product of the high expectations and pressure put on him by not only his peers, but also his instructors. The people in Judai's life that were supposed to be there for him were in fact putting the most stress on him. That is, until Johan came along and proved himself to be just as capable and self-reliant as Judai himself. This single reason can be accounted for most of why they became so close, and explains why Judai went to such lengths to get Johan back, even if that meant losing the ones around him, and even himself in the process. In a certain way, Judai loves Johan more than anyone in the world. Whether this is romantic, friendly, or otherwise is ultimately up to interpretation, but no matter how you look at it, Johan was the most important thing in the world to Judai. With that out of the way, we can look to Judai in Season 4. Season 4 is where Judai really begins to define himself again. At the close of Season 3, he got himself back together, but he wasn't fully healed. He still anguished over the events that had transpired and felt remorse for his actions. Over Season 4, however, is where we see Judai really craft the person that he becomes. Season 4, Judai decides to live a healthier life and move forward despite the struggle that still haunts him. Judai realizes all the pressure put on him was causing him anxiety and stress beyond his ability to cope. So, to combat this, he begins to let people solve their own problems. He almost takes on an attitude of not giving a fuck, but this isn't done with any sort of malice. Judai simply realizes what the root of his own problems was, and acted in the healthiest way to solve it. It's quite satisfying to see Judai tell his friends to sort themselves out, because the reality is, he won't always be there to save them. Judai's arc in GX is possibly the most well thought out and properly ended in all of Yu-Gi-Oh!, and that's fantastic. But shows cannot live by one solid character arc alone. In order to succeed, shows need more than one deep, developed character in its cast, and GX has quite a few of those. To name a few off the top of my head, you have Ryo, Edo, Yubel, Sho, Johan, Jim, and last but certainly not least, the other character I want to talk about, Manjome, or perhaps better known as Chaz in the dub. Manjome undergoes the first well-developed character arc in GX as it happens quite early on. At the beginning of the show, Manjome seems to be a real snotty rich asshole to just about everyone around him who isn't Asuka. He treats everyone around him like garbage because he was brought up to believe that he was the best around, and that it was his destiny to continue to succeed. A bit of time goes by, and the viewer learns that this rude, snotty brat is actually under an inordinate amount of pressure from his family. He is expected to be the absolute top duelist and live up to his brothers. Those brothers, of course, just so happen to be extremely successful businessmen and politicians. When Manjome fails to reach his goal and is defeated by Judai, he essentially undergoes the same arc to Judai. Manjome finds himself at North Academy, and this is basically the best thing that could have happened to him, as once he comes back, he is no longer the insufferable rich brat that he once was. Of course, he doesn't become the warmest or softest character in the show, but he comes back more humble and willing to learn than he once was. Manjome no longer sees the people around him as lesser, but rather he sees them as duelists or friends. Most importantly for Manjome, he can now look to Judai as a friendly rival. He makes the decision to cast aside the pressure and expectations levied upon him by his family and carve out his own path in life. This arc is astoundingly similar to what Judai goes through, and I believe that's no coincidence. Manjome, being Judai's biggest rival at the time, fits perfectly to serve as foreshadowing for the protagonist. Manjome learns that carrying the heavy expectations set by others on your shoulders only leads to pain and hollow victories. After all, if you're only winning to fulfill the expectations of someone else, have you really won at all? Were you to ask Judai or Manjome at the end of the show, surely they would tell you to live for yourself and cut a path that only you can walk. I hope by now I've at least piqued your interest with GX because it's truly an excellent show, and it's definitely worth the time that it takes to watch it. It's one of my absolute favorites, so I didn't want to spoil too much of the main plot points for anyone who hasn't seen it. Since the Western release was so butchered, I know a lot of people skipped this one. And some may not even have known that the series continued into a 4th season. With that being said, I just want to say thanks for making it this far into the video, and if you like what I had to say, feel free to subscribe, that way you can see whenever I put up my next video. Other than that, all I've got left to say is thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.